It is the first day of May, and Lewis, it is time for the much teased, much anticipated big announcement of the David Pakman Show. And I've been teasing the announcement for a couple of weeks. We have been joking about it. People emailed in, they speculated, oh, the announcement is Lewis and David are getting married. They're gay and they're getting married. Or Lewis accidentally had a kid and he's going to announce that, lo and behold, he loves the kid. That's not the announcement, right, Lewis?
I didn't think it was.
So it has been funny, but it actually has been really stressful because this is an announcement that as it gets closer and closer, we realize it's been in the works for many months. In reality, it's been in the works for many years. So I'm going to explain everything about what's going on and why it's going on today. So let's set the stage, Lewis, if I may. We're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of the show. August of 2015 will be 10 years since day one. And since day one, we've really just been trying to figure out the future of the show. We started on one public radio station in Northampton, Massachusetts, back in August of 2005. It's incredible that we're about to reach the 10-year mark, especially since I actually talked to a couple people about this, Lewis. They estimate that between 98 and 99% of the independent shows that started in August of 2005 when we started are no longer on the air. So in one sense, we have already made it into the outliers just based on what we've been able to do and how long we've been doing it. One radio station in 2005, added a podcast, added a few more radio stations until we started a TV version in 2009, put that on YouTube as we continued adding radio and television stations, eventually made it into Free Speech TV in 2010, and that was once a week, really late at night. We continued growing. We expanded from one show every other week. Imagine that, Lewis. Remember those days? To one show a week, to twice a week, to 4 shows per week, and most recently last year to 5 shows per week. In August of 2013, I moved here to New York City for the next phase of the show, and Lewis went to Austin, Texas. That is the sort of status of the show today. We have the 2016 election coming up. I've spoken a lot about how our biggest growth phases are election years, especially the 8 to 10 months leading up to the election. Starting last year, when we expanded to 5 shows per week, I've been really wondering, what is the next step for the David Pakman Show? What's the future of the show, particularly in the context of this next presidential election? Are we going to take a big step before the election? If so, what would that be? Is the David Pakman Show as we know it going to kind of disappear and be absorbed into something else before the election? If so, what would that be? And at the same time, we've both wondered, Lewis, maybe the show has gone as far as the show can go, right? Without selling out, transitioning to a more corporate form of media, maybe we can't go any further. It's tough to lay it all out the way we're going to, but it is the first day of May, and that's why we're making the announcement today, Lewis. May I proceed?
You may proceed. Yeah, I think we should just outline what's going to happen or what the plan is, and just take it from there.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Lewis. I wanted to make sure I check with Lewis before we do any kind of big announcement. So I will proceed. The big announcement is that May 2015. This is crazy. I mean, it's crazy to say, is going to be the last full month of the David Pakman Show before we cease operations and stop the show in its current configuration and location. Can I explain, Lewis?
Yes. It's. I think a lot of people are very confused right now. You should fix this as soon as possible.
I'm going to give you the whole plan now. And I admit it's a little bit risky to lay out the whole plan because if it doesn't happen as planned, it'll be a huge disappointment. And people will be able to point to this video and say, hey, David, remember when you announced that you were doing A, B, and C and none of that stuff happened? That's really lame. But go ahead, Lewis.
But it's important for people to know that we actually have a detailed plan of what we actually want to accomplish instead of just, a jumbled mess.
Exactly. If I don't lay out the whole thing at this point, 10 years in, if I sort of play it coy to be safe, you won't know what we're thinking of, and you won't realize that we really have a pretty extensive plan. So since moving to New York, I've met a ton of people. I've had great conversations about new opportunities for the show. But I've also realized that a lot of the more traditional opportunities, more participation on corporate media, which I've done a lot of since moving here, getting involved with some companies and doing news type projects where I would lose significant editorial control. I've been offered to participate in some so-called documentaries that I actually found out were paid industry pieces. I'll tell these stories in the future. I'll even tell how much some of them offered to pay. And these are going to be fun stories for someday in the future, but not for today. For today, what we need to know is that the future for the David Pakman Show, if we want to maintain the control that we have, if we want to maintain the editorial freedom that we have, is not going to be on corporate media. And as I was having all of these conversations here in New York, I was also having conversations with people in other places about what are they doing in new media? Is there another part of the country that's becoming a huge new media hub with media startups and media technology startups and new ways of looking at journalism? And I brought this question to people I trust and respect, a lot of tech friends of mine who are doing new media startups. I had a really extensive conversation a few weeks ago with Josh Silver, the original founder of Free Press, about what the next step for the show should be. I've spoken to Sam Cedar from the Majority Report about some of the specific steps we want to take. I mentioned last week I was at a conference and I talked for a while with Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks about where we are and where we want to be. Do we fit in more with doing corporate puff pieces as journalism, or do we fit in more with the new wave of new media journalists? Do we maintain this comfortable status quo, right, of steady growth over the last 10 years, or do we really make a move to scale up what we're doing to the next level? I'm 31 years old now. I'll be 32 when the election happens. Do we make a move now? Do I wait, Lewis, until I'm 36? The answer is daunting, but the answer is clear. And thus we arrived at the following plan. I've decided to make a serious commitment, not only to our existing audience, but to new media, rather than trying to sort of eke our way into corporate media that we've seen as a troubled form of media for so long. It's a disaster. The place where all of this is happening, and the place that will be the future home of the David Pakman Show, is Boston, Massachusetts. At the end of May, the David Pakman Show will be leaving New York City. We will have a temporary space back in Massachusetts for the summer, during which time we're going to be undergoing a very, very serious and intense funding campaign. We've already made arrangements to enter our more permanent location in Boston, Massachusetts after the summer. Sounds like a simple plan, right? Why is this risky? It's risky because of what the plan entails. Lewis is also going to be leaving Austin, Texas during the summer. The goal, the idea, is for Lewis to join me in Boston, Massachusetts. Lewis has been working on the show very diligently, part-time for many years. And as you've heard him discuss, he's maintained a part-time job in the service industry during this time. The right thing, the best thing for the show is for Lewis to devote his time full-time to the show. But if we're going to scale, just going from me full-time and Lewis part-time to me full-time and Lewis full-time, that is not going to fly. If we're really going to scale, the show can't depend so much on just Lewis and on me. If I'm out sick or traveling, there's no show. If Lewis is out sick or traveling, I do the show alone, but it's a big strain to handle all of the hosting and the growing technical components of producing this show. So thus, we need to start developing more programming with another host, and this needs to include an investigative component. We've talked about the sad state of investigative journalism for a long time. We've talked about how nobody wants to fund, none of corporate media wants to fund investigative journalism because they're either going to anger their advertisers or big corporations or the government. Why aren't we doing some of that investigative component? So this plan with a new host that will be brought in, cycled in over time, will allow the show to continue on the days that I'm out. It will allow for a third person to handle production if Lewis is out. It is just flat out necessary at this point. If people knew, Lewis, the amount that you and I did, the number of jobs that we cover, they would probably be stunned.
Right. I mean, that's the entire show. It's just me and you. And of course, we have some help here and there. but we really do everything.
So we've talked about the question of whether it's better to try and fail or never try. I know that I would be wondering how far could we have gone if we didn't try to go to this next level. So we're going to try, and here's the plan. Here's how it's going to work. We need to raise some money, and we're going to be putting this together over the next 3 to 5 months. We need to cover the additional cost of Lewis's full-time salary, plus a new part-time person to start with in Boston. We converted my setup to high definition a long time ago. Lewis is not in HD, so we're going to need to get another camera, lighting, and most expensively, a video mixer for when Lewis joins me in Boston to be able to do the live video mixing of the show. We want to develop a mobile reporting setup because this new to be determined addition to the staff is going to not only be doing fill-in hosting duties, not only investigative duties, but also reporting on a mobile basis from where news is happening. We're going to be developing a Roku channel, and hugely important, this is one of the biggest expenses and one of the most important things we're going to be doing, a massive brand awareness campaign on YouTube. You go onto the CNN or BBC YouTube channel. Well, what if as an advertisement before that clip, our show shows up? This is something that is huge for building brand awareness. It costs money, but it is the way, Lewis, that we are going to start directly competing on a more even level with corporate media by showing our content as an advertisement before before people get their news from CNN or BBC or whoever it is. These things are all very expensive, Lewis, as you and I have discussed.
It is very expensive, yes, but it's necessary. I mean, I think the part I'm most, of course, I think the show would be much better off if we were in the same room. Obviously, that would add to the production a lot. But I am very interested in branching out in terms of our content, and that would be huge.
We are going to be able to do investigative content, given the right resources, without being constrained by big corporations and big conglomerates and government officials, and it's going to be really great. Now, we need to raise about $75,000. Why? Well, to really do this, we need to cover not only the upfront expenses of the studio build-out and new equipment, but we also need to have a solid financial plan, really for a full year. Imagine that these changes that we make take a full 12 months before we see an additional penny in revenue. We need to know that that's okay, that we have the money in the bank to do the expansion and to have the additional staffing. So we could maybe do a crowdsourcing campaign, but we've never raised $70,000 on an Indiegogo or Kickstarter. The most we've ever raised is about $30,000. So there will be a crowdfunding campaign towards the end of summer, but we need to start now. So we need to speak to potential donors. We need to speak to potential investors. This is the time to do this. If we can raise $35,000 to $45,000 directly from our generous donors and contributors and potential investors before the campaign, that only leaves $30,000 to $40,000 to raise via crowdfunding, which I would feel comfortable that we could do, Lewis.
I think it's reasonable. We've had successful campaigns before. And obviously, at this point, we have a bigger audience and more people paying attention to the show. So I'm optimistic.
If we can only raise $25,000 ahead of the fundraiser, I think that's still doable, because if we raised $30,000 a year and a half ago, our audience is much bigger. We could probably raise $50,000 more. So we've had some really great people step forward in the past when the show has needed to make upgrades or changes. I'm confident now more than ever that people see that 10 years, this is not a fly-by-night thing. We're here to stay. If we go down, Lewis, we're definitely going down swinging. And I would encourage anybody who has an idea, who has a contribution to make, who wants to discuss making a tax-deductible contribution or a contribution that would be more of an equity investment, or just wants to write us a check, please get in touch. We have a lot of money to raise, but I, Lewis, am, as this is always my thing, I'm cautiously optimistic that a year from now, we're going to have a much bigger and great situation that will not change at all, that we are 0% responsible, beholden to corporate interests and big media conglomerates.
I think if we can avoid that, we've done something right, and we've done it thus far. It's going to be a crazy, chaotic, and stressful time during this transition. but I think it's the right move. I think our goals are just.
Get in touch. Think about it. This is a big deal for us, certainly, and we would love for you to be a part of it, and we will keep you posted as more things develop. We'll take a break. We still have a whole show coming up after this.